Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Finney recording a video lesson for 7th grade math at Red Wing High School. This video lesson is concept number 2, part 2, and our lesson deals with simplifying expressions involving the order of operation, and specifically in this video we're going to look at how we can use the distributive property to simplify those order of operation problems. So you'll see here on our first page a review of the order of operations, which you saw and practiced in the part 1 video. We evaluate the parentheses, then our powers, which we would call exponents to meet our memory trick of PEMDAS. And next we multiply and divide from left to right before finally adding and subtracting from left to right. And so you'll hopefully remember that in our part 1 video and from 6th grade, that many of us remember that using the memory device PEMDAS, and some of us remember it as Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally. Lots of different ways to remember it, whether you are a concrete sequential learner and simply memorize what it means, whether you are a verbal learner and you need to remember that story about Aunt Sally, or whether you make up your own memory tool to remember it by. Okay, so when we walk through this first example that's been worked out for us step by step, I'll encourage you to pause the video and follow along and read and note what these steps mean. In part 1, I made note that you might see parentheses that look like brackets, and here you can see that happen right here. So we have this expression. It looks really complicated, but when we break it down and we work through the steps that we know, it's not as tricky as it first looks. So inside the parentheses, first thing we want to do is look inside those parentheses, and we're going to go as far inside as we can. We're going to work from the inside out. So when we do that, we're going to first take 3.6 divided by 0.9, because that's the furthest inside thing. If you're a little rusty on long division with decimals, you can always double check your work with a calculator. But 3.6 divided by 0.9, I'm going to use some prior knowledge that I know, and I'm going to recognize that 3.6 and 0.9 are really similar to 36 and 9. And I know that 36 divided by 9 is 4. So for those of you who are really good at estimating and doing that mental math in your head, there's a strategy that you might use. 36 divided by 9 is 4. So I bet my answer is going to be 4 or some power of 4. And sure enough, if we put 3.6 divided by 0.9 in our calculator to double check, we find that it does equal 4. Next, we have to deal with these brackets. Brackets count just like parentheses, and 2 plus 4 is 6. Next, we deal with the power, which is really our exponent. 4 squared is the same as 4 times 4, which is 16. Now you'll notice they wrote 16 as a fraction. 16 as a fraction is 16 over 1. The reason they did that was to make it easier for them to visualize how to multiply 1/2 times 16 over 1. But if you are a person who's better at kind of applying or thinking about something in a real life application, 1/2 of 16, if I have 16 of something and I'm going to keep half of it and give the other half to my best friend, that means that I would get 8 and my best friend would get 8. So half of 16 is 8. Lastly, we're going to subtract 8 minus 6 and get an answer of 2. Now, for those of you very early on when we did our How I Like to Learn activity the very first day of school, several of you voted a strong 5 for I like to learn math using technology. And so one thing I love about this example is that it shows us right here those steps that you could use to check your work using a calculator or a tech tool to help you out. Please be sure to pause the video and follow along and read those steps. Get out your calculator and do these steps to make sure that you know how to complete them on your own before you move on to the next example with me. So here we see another example. Okay. And this example, I'm going to do some writing on the side. It's really important that we don't just rely on the calculator to do everything for us. We want to also make sure that we're able to work through and solve these problems using our own brain as our primary calculator. So for those of you who are going, oh my gosh, she ran through that really fast, I don't even remember what powers mean, I'm going to break it apart in this example. So first we want to go all the way inside those parentheses. The furthest inside thing is 48 divided by 6. If we think backwards, 6 times what is 48? 6 times 8 is 48, which means that 48 divided by 6 is going to be 8. Next, we need to work inside these brackets. But within the brackets, we have an extra little thing we have to deal with. That's 6 cubed, right? So 6 cubed is the same as 6 times 6 times 6. We take that number, a power or an exponent is the same as repeated multiplication. 6 times 6 is 36. And then I need to multiply by another 6. Uh-oh, I forgot my calculator in my mom's van, and she's off picking up my brother from a sports game. So I'm going to have to do multiplication old school. So 6 times 6 is 36, and I bring that 3 up to the top. 6 times 3 is 18, plus the 3 I carried, 18, 19, 20, 21. And so 6 cubed is equal to 216. And notice we're going to carry that 8 down because we haven't done anything with it. Now we're going to go back and finish those parentheses. So we had to take a little bit of a detour. We said, well, I'm still in the parentheses, but I have to do that exponent before I can do any other operations. So 216 plus 8 is 224. Now we want to take 1/8 times 224. That's a pretty big number for me to do in my head. We could do like the first example and put 224 over 1, or we could recognize that timesing by 1/8 is the same as dividing into 8. So if I get 1/8 of something, it means I'm dividing or splitting it into 8 parts. So we could also review our long division by taking 224 divided by 8. Well, 8 goes into 22, let's see, 2 times, because 8 times 2 is 16. And when I carry and subtract, 12 minus 6 is 6, and I carry the 4 down, 8 goes into 64 8 times. I know that because it's a perfect square. And my answer is 28. If you don't remember how to do those steps of long division, you could double check your work on a calculator, or you could go to YouTube and look up a resource and a review video of how to do long division. There's lots of examples that can help you review that concept from 5th and 6th grade. Our last step is to take 28 minus 20, which equals 8. So far, these steps follow the same process and procedure as what we did in the part 1 video. Now we're going to look at how we could have done this problem differently. So there is another option for how we could have done this problem. Instead of starting inside the parentheses, we could have said, I want to start outside the parentheses, and I want to multiply in first. Now in this example, that wasn't a great strategy to use, and I'll tell you why. It's because we have parentheses inside parentheses. That gets a little trickier to work with. But if we fast forward 2, another space where I can write out an example. Here we go, I'll put me over here. Sorry if I just got you dizzy there, folks. Okay, I'm going to write down another example that might show where it's a little easier to do that distributive property first. Okay, so let's just say that I had this example. 2 times 7 plus 3 minus 15. Okay. We could start inside the parentheses and we could do 7 plus 3. Or I could take this number that's outside the parentheses and I could distribute it in. Distributing means that we're going to multiply into the parentheses. And 2 times 7 is 14. Plus 2 times 3 is 6. Minus 15. Now I can do my adding and subtracting from left to right, just like Aunt Sally says. So there's 2 ways to deal with parentheses. The first is to work inside the parentheses and simplify your way out. The second is to distribute that number into the parentheses. We're going to see more examples of that will come really in handy when we start working with variable expressions. So you don't have to use the distributive property now, but know that in a couple of lessons, about 3 concepts away, our 7th grade standards do have us use the distributive property with variables. So distributive property will come back again. 14 plus 6 is 20 minus 15 gives me an answer of 5. So there's 2 ways that we can simplify expressions that involve parentheses. We can use that distributive property to multiply in, or we can start inside the parentheses and multiply back out. I'm going to encourage you to pause the video and copy these 4 example problems down and try them on your own. To gauge your confidence level, both with complex expressions, with parentheses and powers, in addition to the fact that these examples also include some decimals to help review your decimal arithmetic that you worked on last year in 6th grade. I will see you in our next lesson.